I'm Ian Edgson. I live in the old school in Ifield, Crawley, Sussex. Mine's a typical 1960s Crawley New Town, southeast London overflow story. Dad's job moved to Manor Royal Industrial Estate. We moved into a modern 3-bedroom council house with a garden, local shops and schools, grass verges and green spaces. Crawley felt Newtown fresh. Later, I discovered parts of Crawley were old. The new town, developed from 1949 onwards, had absorbed ancient villages like Worth to the east, Ifield to the west, and Crawley in between. Future Prime Minister Harold Macmillan came in 1951 to see the Development Corporation's plans. Ifield is the best preserved of the original villages. Some buildings are over 400 years old. There's a conservation area map near the Plough pub. If you walk into old Ifield today, you'll probably come in where Rusborough Road meets the corner of Ifield Street. And the first old building you'll see will be the old school, which looks like this. It used to look like this. And that's where I live, in the old school, which is nearly 200 years old. It was a functioning school for 101 years and has been a residential dwelling for 75 years. A couple of old photographs are well known locally. This one's on the wall in the Plough pub. And this one's on the wall in the Royal Oak pub. I want to tell the story of our building through some key phases. Its construction in 1843, its expansion in the 1870s, a second expansion in 1908, its closure in 1944, its conversion to a dwelling in the 1950s, and what's here now in the 2020s. And I'll clear up some misconceptions too. The foundation stone has this inscription: Ifield Sunday School, erected by voluntary contributions, aided by grants from the National Diocesan Societies, and a donation from Her Majesty Adelaide, the Queen Dowager, AD 1843. G.H. Scott, Vicar, A.C. Mills and H. Cutler, Churchwardens. When Ifield Sunday School first opened in 1843, state education didn't exist. That didn't arrive until the Education Acts of 1870 and 1902. British History Online says the first recorded mention of a schoolmaster of Ifield was in 1821. Peter Gwyn's book, A History of Crawley, says around 100 children were being educated in Ifield in the 1830s. There were 3 day schools, plus a boarding school. No one knows where. Lessons were given in private houses for children whose parents could pay. Things were changing. In 1811, the Church of England set up the National Society for promoting the education of the poor in the principles of the established church. Their mission to put a church school in every parish transformed education in the 19th century. Within 40 years, there were 12,000 church schools across England and Wales, known as national schools. Crawley's first national school opened in 1825 on the junction of Ifield Road and Victoria Road. Modern houses are on that site now. There's a plaque for fundraiser and co-founder Sarah Robinson, a Quaker, though she later quit to set up her own school in 1854, after the vicar excluded nonconformist children. Non-denominational, open to all schools like Sarah Robinson's new school were called British schools. Hers was in Church Road, later called Robinson Road, and now demolished, roughly where Asda is now. Our old school, founded in 1843, was part of what was known as the Sunday School movement, subsidised by church subscriptions and one-off contributions from wealthy people like Adelaide, the Queen Dowager, who's credited on our foundation stone. A Queen Dowager is a king's widow. Adelaide had been Queen of England for 7 years, while William IV was king. But when he died in 1837, the crown passed to his niece Victoria. Adelaide had to find a new role. She became a patron of education. It's unlikely Adelaide would have attended the old school's opening ceremony, but who knows? I'll come back to Adelaide, because our foundation stone isn't her only stonemasonry tribute. First, let's go to St Margaret's Church, built in the 13th century when Ifield was a very small village. St Margaret's has a list of all the vicars over the years. A key name on our foundation stone is George Henry Scott, the vicar from 1842 until 1850. Scott was a man in a hurry. Look at those dates. He started at St Margaret's in 1842, and by 1843 he'd built the old school. Although then, of course, it was the new school. The Church of England's Records Office in Lambeth Palace has a file of records relating to the old school. The oldest document is a letter written by Scott in 1842, just after he became the local vicar. It gives a glimpse of the man and the times. Ifield's principal inhabitants were farmers. Their children could go to St John's New Day School in Crawley, but were expected to go for Sunday school lessons there too. Scott says the 3-mile walk was too far for younger children, and elder children struggled to get there when the countryside was muddy. You don't need to read too deeply between the lines to spot Scott's real issue. A key phrase in his letter is, "The clergyman cannot exercise so close a superintendence over the school as is desirable." He thinks the religious education of Ifield's children is his job, not the Vicar of St John's. He'd launched his own Sunday school within a week of arriving at St Margaret's, but lacked space. Even his vestry was encumbered with a very large chest in which is stored the parish flour for weekly distribution to the poor. Back in those days of children should be seen but not heard, and ideally not even seen, Scott laments, "It compels the boys to be scattered through the fields adjacent, at the time immediately previous to the divine service, to the utter subversion of order and decency, and the annoyance of persons coming to church in that direction." He stresses, "It has become very desirable on many accounts that the parish of Ifield should possess a Sunday school of its own within an easy distance of the parish church and the minister's house." Alas, his parishioners are farmers, not wealthy individuals, so he earnestly hopes that some grants may be obtained to enable the desired object to be carried into effect. Reverend Scott was a puritanical new broom. His predecessor allowed parish meetings to take place in the public house, which was deplorable. So he put a stop to that. Scott's letter lays it on pretty thick, but it's clear the old school only came into existence because he really wanted a Sunday school building and pushed very hard for it. A funding application dated 15th of February 1843 gives some background information. For example, 1,059 people lived in the parish at that time. The 1851 census shows that 49% of people living in Ifield were also born in Ifield. A high proportion of the other 51% were probably born within the boundaries of what would later become Crawley Newtown. People weren't as mobile then. The application form makes it clear Scott wanted to build a Sunday school, not a daily school. The estimated cost was £114, about £14,000 in today's money. Scott had £76 vouched for. A document dated February the 16th, 1843, specifies the new building would be a single-room school. Someone made a pencil note on 2nd of September to say the Reverend wasn't quite in position to sign off the completion because he was still £10 short. What did Ifield look like back in 1843? Crawley Museum has a painting from 1840, painted by the daughter of Spencer Lewin, who was George Scott's predecessor as Vicar of St Margaret's. This 1839 tithe map has an X roughly where Miss Lewin's easel would have been positioned to paint the scene. Hatched in red, adjacent to plots 428 and 429, is the piece of land upon which the old school was about to be constructed. This document, dated 8th of March 1843, is the terms of union for parties desirous of uniting their schools with the National Society. The rival St John's School was a national school, where teachers would have been church members instructing children in accordance with the teachings of the Church of England. George Scott wasn't aiming to build a national school in Ifield, but he'd approached the National Society for a contribution to help bridge his cash shortfall, so had to join the Society in order to get their £20 donation. And so, in September 1843, St Margaret's had a new Sunday school building, and the old school in Old Ifield was born. But how did the old school get from being a single-room Sunday school in 1843 to this much bigger school building by 1908, and then become this smaller residential building in the modern era? Michael Goldsmith's book, Around Crawley, says the original building was enlarged in 1871, which is true. It says the school was originally called Ifield National School when two Sunday schools were amalgamated in 1843. Not true. The foundation stone confirms the original name was Ifield Sunday School, not Ifield National School, and Reverend Scott's letters said it was to de-amalgamate from St John's Sunday School. British History Online adds the school was enlarged in 1871 and reopened as an elementary day school with 30 boys and 26 girls in 1872. St Margaret's vicar then was Richard Blaker. He would have been involved in the decision to transform the Sunday school into a weekday school. Reverend Scott had already linked Ifield Sunday School with the National Society, so the new name of Ifield National School was a natural development. This first entry from the day school's log on January the 8th, 1872, says the new master, Alfred Horace Davy, commenced his duties and admitted 57 children. Another 13 joined during the first 2 weeks, but on the Thursday of week 2, the master notes, attendance in the morning was rather small owing to wet weather. Education still wasn't compulsory. Scrolling forward 10 years, the school's log for 28th of September 1883 shows attendance had steadily increased to 88, though on October 3rd it dropped to 75 when it was very wet. Those farmers' fields were still muddy. Few families lived in the village centre. Here's a photo from that time, looking down the Rusper Road. St Margaret's Church is in the distance on the left, the school's on the right. It's a very rural area. In Crawley Museum, I found a page of press cuttings, reports of entertainment evenings held in the school during 1884. On February the 25th, the children of the Ifield National School gave an entertainment consisting of the pieces they are preparing to sing and recite to Her Majesty's Inspector. The room was well filled with an appreciative audience. On March 1st, the children gave a pleasant and amusing entertainment of songs and recitations which they are learning for the examination. Teachers and audience members did party pieces too, and the enjoyable entertainment concluded with singing God Save the Queen. April the 14th had another concert for another packed audience. The programme included some classical ensemble pieces and ended with a play, The Booking Office, set in a railway station. And on November the 8th, 1884, Mr. Tracy of the Railway Hotel gave a magic lantern entertainment where, by means of his machine, he took the children and their friends up the Rhine. Crawley Museum has the Ifield National School's minutes from 1888 to 1902, which give a glimpse of life around the turn of the century. St Margaret's had a different rector, Reverend Walter Loveband, who chaired the management committee. I found this letter he sent local residents on the 21st of February 1888, informing them the school was £50 in debt and a collector would be calling on them for money. The church could legally tax parishioners in those days. The annual report for 1890-91 shows the debt had reduced to £13, owing to the great generosity of some subscribers making extra donations, like they had a choice. We learned that the headmaster was Mr. Roberts, and the school is carefully and intelligently taught. Both discipline and instruction are very good. Moving into the 20th century, 1901-02's annual report warns that the new education bill, now before Parliament, will, if it becomes law, make considerable alterations. But that's for the future. For now, the number of children attending the school is 129, a larger number than in the previous history of the school. Every schoolchild received a yearly attendance certificate, like this one from December 1904 for Percy Brown, who attended every single one of the 416 times the school opened that year. This painting in Crawley Museum, which they've dated circa 1900, is credited to P. Brown. Percy, I presume. A portrait of the old school by the young artist. Here's a 1904 certificate for another 100% attender, 11-year-old Beatrice Rapley, and one for 1905 when she was 12 years old. Beatrice, born in 1893, is the girl on the left. Her sister on the right also attended the school. They're wearing their uniforms. And this certificate from 1908 is for their younger brother James Rapley. Beatrice gave these to Ifield Village Conservation Area Secretary Jenny Frost, who passed them on to me. This photo of children and teachers gathered outside the school is around 1903. It's highly likely that Percy Brown, Beatrice Rapley and some of her siblings are all in the picture. West Sussex Local History's website annotation says, "The National School, Rectory Lane, Ifield, Crawley. Pupils of all ages pose in front of the schoolhouse. The girls stand on the right and the boys on the left. A boy in the centre holds a blackboard that reads Ifield School. The girls wear white pinafores and hats. The boys wear dark breeches and jackets with white collars and flat caps. A male teacher with moustache stands amongst the boys. The school was built in 1843 and originally called Ifield National School. By circa 1910, it was being called Ifield Church of England School. In 1907, the school had 108 pupils." The same picture crops up in the book Looking Back at Crawley, with this quote from Colin Edgar. The photograph was taken in about 1903. I can pinpoint this date as my granddad Raymond Chantler is not in it, and he attended the school from 1903. Looking at the picture of the teacher and Mr. Judson, and looking at him in a picture with my great aunt in 1907, he looks younger. Two photos from 1906 were supplied by Colin, whose granddad Raymond is highlighted in the first, and his great aunt Edith Chantler is far left on row 3 in the second. The male teacher is the same guy who does look slightly older here. Collins' theory works for me, so let's date this photo 1903. The annual report for year-end 30th of April 1900 says the school was under the careful and painstaking care of Mr. Jut Sum, ending with an M, not an N, so let's also give him his correct name. By 1907, education was compulsory for all. The old school, with over 100 pupils already, was too small. Reverend Walter Loveband, in post since 1888, wrote to the authorities in June 1904, kicking off a campaign for an extension. His letter says the school had outgrown the site, specifying the need for a new building. There is no playground, and the cloakroom and office accommodations are poor. He says St John's National School was stretched beyond capacity too. Loveband throws in some choice bits of supporting evidence to bolster his case, like this quote from the school inspector's 1901 report. "In spite of the cramped accommodation, this is one of the best country schools in my district." And these from the inspector's 1903 report. "The attendance continues to increase. The school has outgrown its present quarters. The staff has been below requirements, but there is no space for a fourth teacher to work in." A grant application made by Loveband in 1904 says 181 children need to be accommodated, 107 boys and girls plus 74 infants. He estimated the cost at £1,535, of which he had £462, so was £1,073 short. On his 1907 application, he was seeking to build a classroom for 50 infants at a cost of £525. Again, he had some money, but was £139 short. I'm guessing he hadn't managed to get enough funding in 1904, so this second grant request was to bridge the gap. Getting consent for new classrooms and finance to build them was part of the battle, but Loveband also needed land for the enlargement. On the 30th of December 1907, there was a meeting between the National Society and Mr. Elliot, who was handling the land element. Things were getting complicated. The plan was to transfer ownership of land donated by a local farmer into a special legal trust rather than to St Margaret's Church. The Society's officer noted, "It appears that the vendor of the new site objects to conveyance on one of the Society's forms and wishes to make a conveyance without trusts at all." I said that we should have no objection to a conveyance being taken without trusts, provided a proper declaration of trust was immediately afterwards executed. The National Society was pushing the vicar into a trust ownership arrangement. This later paragraph is relevant too. Mr. Elliot mentioned that some subscribers were afraid that the National Society's form of trust would absolutely prevent any arrangement for the transfer of the school property to the LEA, if such should be found desirable in the future. I pointed out that on the contrary, the proviso to the Union Clause actually provided for such a transfer. But I said that the veto in such arrangement given to the National Society would certainly be exercised unless a transfer were really necessary, and unless also satisfactory terms were agreed to. What was going on? Well, the Government's Education Act of 1902 had brought a new player onto the field with the introduction of local education authorities. Church schools weren't sure what the implications of the new state school system might be for them, and the National Society was keen to protect its influence into the future. Reverend Loveband was probably just focused on getting the school enlarged. So a legal trust was set up, and 2 pieces of land were transferred into it on the 25th of February 1908. This deed plan, dated 21st of February 1908, shows the whole site. The coloured sections in blue and red are the additional pieces of land acquired. What no one could foresee was that 40 years later, a bomb would cause the building to be evacuated and the school would be separated out from it to be operated from a different building. The trust would entangle the building when it was really intended to be a safety net for the school. Legal confusion about who owned these different parcels of land would cause real headaches later, as we'll see. But that wouldn't be Reverend Loveband's problem. Within a few months, as this July 1908 document confirms, the new school buildings were finished in a satisfactory and workmanlike manner, built of the proper dimensions and fully completed in all respects. The old school had grown substantially once more. The enlargement works, including construction, architects' fees, legal charges and stamp taxes, cost £641.14 shillings and twopence. That's about 100k in today's money. And the school got another new name, Ifield Church of England School. Michael Goldsmith's book Around Crawley in Old Photographs thinks this photo was taken circa 1910, 2 years after the new extension. Every book since runs with that date. It's hard to tell though, because the second enlargement works were at the rear. Either theory, the school's owners may have taken the opportunity to remove the superfluous clock tower whilst builders were on site in 1908, which, if correct, would mean this image must predate 1908. I'll explain later. The archive papers show there was some debate in the early 1900s about whether the school could operate without a playground, but although there was some suggestion the school might need to be closed, the argument went away. They never got a school playground. If you zoom in on this old photo of the village green, school children are playing on it. That would have been fine in the summer, but other times children still played out front, in the road. How dangerous was that? Well, passing motor cars weren't such a big risk in the early 20th century, but also this part of the Rusper Road wasn't as fundamental to navigating your way around Ifield Village then as it is now. If we zoom out on a modern-day aerial map, you'll see Ifield Street, in blue, running down the side of the old school, is now the main way down to the pub and the church. But it never used to be. A century ago, the access road to the village centre, shown in red, went along the side of the village green and behind the school. What changed? Well, one of the old vicars, who lived in Rectory Lane, didn't want the traffic coming down the road towards this house. So he had the road system altered, and Ifield Street became the main thoroughfare into the village. NIMBYs are nothing new. You can still see though where the old track was. After 1908's extension work, the school rolled through World War I towards World War II. Through Crawley Museum, I got access to an interview given for a local history film, The Road to Crawley, and its accompanying book, A Crawley Childhood. This is Don Grantham, who grew up at No. 1 School Cottage in the 1930s.
I went to school at the church school, which by the time I went to school, I was actually living next door to the school. So there was no chance whatsoever of playing truant, because they knew if you weren't there, they would have come and got you. We used to have a school attendance officer, and sort of he came from the Horsham Education Committee. And I can't for the life of me remember his name, but he would come round and look at the register, and if anybody wasn't at school, he would go round, and he had an old Ford car, and he used to go round to see why was this child not at school and all. So there was there was quite an incentive to get to school. I've got an idea his name was Mr. Shire, but whether it was or not, but I can see him in my mind's eye now with his car, an old Ford, and he would go round and sort of get at the parents. And in those days, anybody in authority going to see a parent, that was quite a thing, but they weren't sort of shown the door or anything. It was sort of not quite down on bended knees, but almost.
Don remembers the school day finished early in Ifield back in the 1830s, when a woman getting married was required to quit teaching.
The headmistress, Mrs. Jackson, and Miss Hillman used to travel up by train from Horsham to Ifield every day. And one of the reasons why we finished school at 3:30 was so that they could walk back to Ifield station and catch the train back to Horsham, whereas Crawley, they used to carry on till 4:00. But this party that we had for Miss Hillman, she got married, and there was quite a send-off. Well, today, a teacher getting married, she just comes back to work, and that's it. But in those days, it was her sort of teaching career was put on hold, I should think. Well, I never heard any more about her, and we had Miss Richards, and she was very, very nice.
School numbers had declined between the wars, but with World War II approaching, that changed. Here's Don again.
Ifield has been invaded 3 times since the Norman conquest. The first invasion we had was over 100 evacuees. Now, another boy that I went to school with, who again must have lived at least a mile away from the school, if not farther, his parents were convinced that there wouldn't be a war. And to stand in our upstairs bedroom window and see these 3 buses they were, arriving in Rusper Road by the school, sort of we knew then that something was going to happen.
This quote from Don is in the book A Crawley Childhood. During the war, we were outnumbered, 10-1 with evacuees, because there weren't many of us there at school at the beginning of the war. The school wasn't big enough, and they took over the scout hut and a big room in the rectory as a classroom. Here's a school photo on Ifield Village Green, which includes some evacuees. Though much safer than London, Crawley suffered a fair amount of aerial bombardment. 2,000 incendiary bombs, 50 high explosive bombs, and 5 doodlebugs fell on Crawley, and this map shows where. One V1 doodlebug destroyed 15 houses, killed 7 people, and seriously injured 44 others in the summer of 1944, when it fell on Oak Road near Crawley High Street. 10 days before, another doodlebug had exploded in Ifield, although the school log on June 30th, 1944 only showed they'd been unable to get the school dentist in. But someone added this postscript, presumably the next morning. At 6 p.m. on June 30th, a flying bomb fell in the meadows by school cottages, and the force of the blast rendered the school unfit for occupation. No one was in the building at the time. Closing school early to enable teachers to catch the 3:30 Horsham train got everyone away from danger. Although Don Grantham and his mum, living next door to the school, were caught out.
We had doodlebugs around the area. There were quite a few, one way and another, because they used to try and shoot them down before they got to London. And one particular evening, or afternoon, we were going over to my grandmother's, my mother and I, and we just got outside. This is in June. That the neighbours were there. We were out there talking, and they were haymaking just up the road. And my mother looked up and said, "Quick, everybody down," which our next door neighbours laid down in the front garden. My mother and I ran across the road, and there was a ditch there then, and we laid in this ditch. And normally these doodlebugs, they would go along, you'd hear the engine stop, and then they'd come down. But this one wasn't, it was still going, the engine was still going. So apparently it had been hit by anti-aircraft fire on the bypass. And because I suppose being a bit smaller than my mother, I was a bit lower. I was nearer than what she was, but she got shrapnel in her back. And of course, when we got up and sort of people started appearing, she said to me, "There's a burning in my shoulder," and there was this piece of shrapnel poking out of her back, and they rushed her off to Crawley Hospital, and the lady that lived next door, and they were in there for 2 or 3 days. They took, there were, 3 men and 2 women taken there as casualties. But that was quite a frightening experience for a young lad of sort of 13, I think I was then.
The school's log for July the 1st, 1944, summarises a meeting convened in the wake of the previous evening's bomb. Dr. Reed, Assistant Director of Education, Mr. Roberts, Her Majesty's Inspectorate, Mr. Bishop, Her Majesty's Inspectorate, the Rector, Mrs. Kember, and the head teacher met at the school to inspect the premises, and it was decided that as soon as the necessary stock and equipment could be salvaged, the school should be reopened at Little Deerswood. How, or to what extent, the force of the blast rendered the school unfit for occupation isn't recorded. When I cover post-war structural changes to the building, I'll unpick what I think happened. The children were moved to Little Deerswood, a 15th century private house up the road, which presumably got commissioned into service using emergency war powers. Deerswood Lodge Care Home is on that site now. The children were expected to return once the building was patched up, but the old school never did reopen for educational purposes. Not because it had been bombed to bits, that's a myth I'll debunk later, but because Crawley got earmarked for post-war development. With brand new schools planned for every neighbourhood in Crawley Newtown, it made sense to leave the children at Little Deerswood until Ifield's new school was built. With Ifield's new school coming, the Education Authority had no need for the old school. St Margaret's vicar, Reverend Everard Duncan Dean, another clergyman whose handwriting takes a bit of deciphering, wrote to the National Society on the 12th of May 1945 to stake a claim in a letter headed Bomb Damage Consequences. He says he wasn't consulted and wouldn't have agreed to the decision to keep the school children at Little Deerswood after the war, and reckons that effectively turned it into a council school. His main point is wrapped up in this rather convoluted question. In clearing up the consequences, I am now seeking from you an opinion or a legal interpretation, giving me as trustee and the other managers or the foundation managers information as to whether the managers have any further responsibility for the building, or alternatively whether this responsibility should be formally by resolution surrendered, if so to whom, and whether our parochial church council ought to take over use of the building until disposed of. He goes on to say, my desire is to save the building, A, as a parochial asset, B, as a capital asset, awaiting the development plan. Let's decode that. He thinks the empty old school building belongs to St Margaret's, and he wants to bring it back under church control, but with some compensation payment for the state of it, as he doesn't think the church should pay the estimated £500 to fix the damage sustained whilst the local educational authority was in charge. Remember the disquiet 40 years before over the wisdom of using a legal trust arrangement to own those additional pieces of land? Well, the warning the church and the society paid little heed to then is complicating things now, as Dean bemoans. I am told that if I apply for a licence from Ministry of Works, I am either being dishonest or ignoring the terms of the trust, seeing that it cannot now be repaired as a school building. I do not see why we should lose our right to compensation because of the accident. A note in the files from around this time, scribbled by someone unknown, summarises the confusion. There is something odd about the sites of Ifield School. Is it 2 schools or 1 school? On June the 5th, 1945, prompted by Reverend Dean's letter, H. Hawkins of the National Society wrote to the Reverend Canon Brown Wilkinson, the Canon at Chichester Cathedral, and the Regent's Director of Education. Basically, the old school is a divorce problem which the National Society would be happy to settle. Hawkins thinks the Ministry of Education and the Charity Commissioners wouldn't object if the old school building was released back to St Margaret's, and he'd be content, but wants the church to swallow the repair costs, Chichester Diocese to help with Little Deerswood School's future funding, and all parties to agree the National Society and Educational Authority won't be on the hook if any ramifications arise when unscrambling who owns which bits of the old school site. Dean, the local vicar, isn't in the loop, as is clear from this extract. We understand that the buildings on the sites are so arranged that one part of the property cannot be sold without the remainder. We do not know what is likely to be the attitude to the above suggestions by the vicar, managers and the parochial church council respectively. Reverend Canon Brown Wilkinson of Chichester wrote back to inform H. Hawkins of the National Society that he was happy with the proposal, saying, "I will take the point raised up with the vicar, managers and parochial church council," but adds, "I am not expecting an easy passage as they are a difficult crew." From the absence of any further correspondence, it seems nothing happened. Maybe Reverend Dean and St Margaret's PCC were just too difficult. We then scroll forward 5 years to 1950, and guess what? St Margaret's has another new vicar, Reverend George Francis Dow, and the old school is up for sale. Thomas Egger, senior partner of Thomas Egger and Son, solicitors, wrote to the National Society on the 30th of June 1950, saying, "An offer has been received through the diocesan surveyor to buy the site as it stands for £800. Both he, the vicar and the diocesan education committee think this is a very good offer which should be clinched as soon as possible." Things have been unblocked somehow. Guess what though? Those split legal titles for the different parcels of land is still a problem. Egger's letter also reveals there's no documentation to prove St Margaret's even owned the original site back in 1843. And with regard to the additional land acquired for the second enlargement, the legal position is that land was given to the vicar and church wardens in their personal capacities, rather than as officers of the church, before they signed their ownership rights over into that legal trust arrangement, which we know none of them really understood, but were warned about. By 1950, of course, the original 3 trustees were all dead, complicating things further still. Egger's legal opinion is the £800 sale could be put into effect with some legal manoeuvres. The original 1843 site can be claimed as vested in the rector of St Margaret's on the grounds of long possession, which could be legally underpinned by a statement of declaration by him and for the adjacent pieces of land the rector could legally appoint himself plus others as new trustees of the old trust, and they would then be able to authorise the sale of the other bits of land under the provisions of the 1925 Land Act. Egger acknowledges it's a complex matter. He's asking the National Society if they are content for him to draw up a contract on this basis and support efforts to persuade the Minister of Education to approve the sale and the allocation of the proceeds. 14 months later, it transpires that all the permissions have been obtained, the various legal hurdles cleared, and the sale and purchase processes successfully completed. Because on August 2nd, 1951, Horsham Rural District Council grants development permission to the new owner, enabling him to be able to convert the old school to a dwelling house. In keeping with just about everybody else over the years, the council managed to get the name wrong on the planning permission. They called it Ifield School, which is what everyone used to call it, judging by the child's placard in this old photo, although that was never its official name. The 1951 conveyance document, quite a thick document, brings the different parcels of land together legally, as worked out by solicitor Thomas Eggers. The man who had bought the site for £825 and got his planning application approved by the council was Mr. Hedley Stuart Haynes of nearby Langley Lane. The new dwelling, once Hedley Haynes had converted it, wasn't actually called the Old School. He rechristened it Villa Adelaide, as you can see inscribed on our front gate. It was a nice touch to name the new house after Adelaide, the Queen Dowager, who was the founding patron. She's in residence twice, inscribed on our foundation stone in the 1840s and again on our front gate in the 1950s. Land Registry records show the house was officially titled Villa Adelaide for over 20 years, but everyone locally just called it the Old School, and that had become the official name at the Land Registry too, by the time we bought it in 2012. I've no idea who legally orchestrated that name change from Villa Adelaide to the Old School. In truth, whatever name it used to be called, however it may be commonly referred to, or whatever name signs are on the gate or the door, as far as the Land Registry is concerned, it's technically 3 different pieces of land legally stitched together under the title number WSX 12776. How come this building looks like this 100 years later? I'll explain the main structural changes and clear up some misconceptions as we go. Let's start with the common misunderstanding that the Old School was destroyed in World War II. Why might people think that? Peter Longstaff Tyrrell's 2002 book, Barracks to Bunkers, says, a V1 fell close to Ifield Cricket Ground, badly damaging cottages and the school, which was later demolished. Demolished? Was it? The Ifield Village Conservation Association kind of perpetuated that story too. Their 2009 booklet says, Old Schoolhouse on the corner was built in the remains of the church school that served the village from 1843 until it was damaged by a flying bomb in 1944. And then a bit further down it says, the bomb-damaged part was removed in 1956 and the remainder converted to a dwelling house. In 2016's edition, it's more dramatic. The church school, now demolished, served the village from 1843 until 1944, when it was hit by a flying bomb. So, was the Old School demolished? Not quite. Was the house built in the remains? No, it is the remains. Was the bomb-damaged part removed in 1956? No, that's not accurate. Some elements of the Old School building were removed, but not because they were bomb damaged. That was for a different reason. Look at this 1907 photo again, compared with this post-war photo when the building was up for sale. It doesn't look much different, does it? The clock tower has disappeared. This 1932 photo shows the clock tower had disappeared before World War II. I've seen no evidence there ever was a clock. Back in 1884, when fundraising concerts were being held in the school, one newspaper reported, "The proceeds, £1.10 after paying expenses, were for the tower and the Teachers' Orphan Association." They could have been fundraising for St Margaret's Church tower, of course, but I wonder whether this could be the first indication that removal of the redundant school clock tower was on the to-do list. My guess is the clock tower was either unsafe or superfluous, and probably got dismantled in 1908 when builders were on site for the enlargement works. Otherwise though, the building looks to be in the same state after the war as before. Can you see any evidence of significant bomb damage? The windows might be boarded up, but that's all. So let's dig into this more deeply. Where did the bomb explode? And did it do any real damage? No photos of the Ifield bomb aftermath seem to exist. I found nothing directly related to the school other than what it said in the school log. At 6 p.m. on June the 30th, a flying bomb fell in the meadows by school cottages, and the force of the blast rendered the school unfit for occupation. Rex Williams wrote a memoir looking back on his Crawley childhood. He describes seeing the bomb that day. About 4:30 p.m, I was in our garden with my brother and dog. The rasping, crackling sound of a doodlebug became louder as it arrived from an easterly direction. It came in a direct line up our garden path at about 600 feet. The underside was duck-egg blue and there were black crosses on the wings. Immediately over our house, the motor cut out and the bomb started to fall. All three of us ran indoors and dived under the kitchen table. There was a muffled explosion in the distance, so we ran out to the road to investigate. A column of black smoke was rising ever higher in the north. The bomb had fallen about 50 yards west of St Margaret's Hall. We were told it had killed a bull and blown a man over a haystack without hurting him. Rex lived in Deerswood Road, West Green, where the post-war council houses now stand. If you draw a line from his house, marked red, to St Margaret's Hall, now the Masonic Lodge, on Ifield Green, also marked red, the spot marked X, 50 yards west of there, is roughly where the swings are, a good 350 yards from the old school on the corner of Ifield Street. The map showing where bombs fell in Crawley has its Ifield X in a slightly different place, showing the bomb in another part of the cricket field. The school's log corroborates that the doodlebug landed on the meadows, now known as the village green. Crawley Museum has historical records for James Longley, a local builder. Their note on bomb damage is interesting. Throughout these years, we had kept away from bomb damage repairs wherever possible, to enable ourselves to get on with operational work, but occasions arose when we just had to lend a hand, with local doodlebugs. Ifield, June the 30th, 44. We turned out every man we could during the emergency. So there was obviously some emergency building damage in Ifield, which needed urgent fixing the day after the bomb fell in Ifield. But where? What? Stella Beresford, whose great-grandfather lived 3 doors along from the school, in Den Cottage, now called Rose Cottage, told me her great-aunt said their internal plaster ceilings collapsed when the bomb went off. And remember Don Grantham, who lived next door to the school? He said he and his mum dived into a ditch across the road as the bomb flew past, spitting out bits of shrapnel. He also said they moved out temporarily to his grandmother's.
Of course, after the doodlebug landed, that we couldn't live in the house where we were living. All the ceilings were down, all the windows had gone, and a lot of the tiles are off.
I guess Longley's the builders were busy patching up ceilings and replacing windows, so people could get back into their houses. I don't think the old school got patched up at the same time though. A letter from the vicar on the 12th of March 1947 says, "I imagine that you know the school premises were badly blitzed in 1944, and adds, the old school building has remained ever since a local eyesore in a state of increasing deterioration." I'm translating this as shorthand for it having been caught up in the blitz, rather than it was obliterated. It makes no sense that the school building would have taken a bigger hit than those cottages which stood between it and where the bomb fell. All needed to be demolished, yet those cottages are still standing. The local eyesore remark suggests they probably just boarded up the windows the day after the bomb fell, but never got around to clearing up the mess. So, after having stood empty for 3 years, it was looking a bit neglected. And in Reverend Dean's Bomb Damage Consequences letter to the National Society in 1945, which was seeking compensation for the state of the building, he says, the school suffered damage from a flying bomb estimated at £500 to £550. That's about £27,000 in today's money. Only what some people might pay for a new kitchen. So here's what I think happened. The bomb flew in from West Green, which is away over my right shoulder, past the old school and the neighbouring cottages, which are sort of behind me, and it flew on a line inside the hedge of the village green, on the trajectory that I'm now walking, aiming just left of the old St Margaret's Hall, which is now the Masonic Lodge, and it would have fallen to earth somewhere around where I am now, which is like if you're playing cricket off to the left, it's over the mid-wicket boundary, perhaps backward square leg. So I reckon the bomb landed somewhere here, which is about 100 yards on to the village green and maybe 300 yards from the old school. The force of the blast, with bits of shrapnel flying off as it fell, probably blew the glass out of the old school's windows, which would have shattered into the classrooms. That, plus maybe some ceiling plaster coming down and some roof tiles coming off, like in the neighbours' cottages, would have been sufficient reason to close the school and move the children to Little Deerswood. Temporarily, until the mess could be cleared up. Some confusion arises partly because 2 V1 bombs exploded near schools in Crawley. And the stories get mixed up. When I go through the school's name changes later, you'll see how easily that can happen. The less exciting but actual reason for the structural changes made to the building in the 1950s was that the council gave Hedley Haynes permission to convert the old school into a dwelling, provided he complied with some specific conditions. A. All existing accesses to Ifield Road to be stopped up and obliterated. B. Pedestrian access to be from the side lane, at least 20 feet from the junction of this lane with the classified road. C. The boundary wall on the Ifield Road frontage to be carried right through at the rear of the demolished porch to remove the dangerous obstruction which would arise if left at a low level. The reasons for all 3 clauses are given as in the interests of highway safety. So, it's boring, I know, but basically, council planning controls, not bomb damage, were responsible for the post-war building alterations. Why would the council want this post-war structure to become this smaller structure? Well, Rusper Road might have been safe enough for kids to play on in 1907, but it was much busier 50 years on. Motor transport had increased a lot. And remember, the rector had blocked up the old village access road, so Ifield Street was now the main road in. With the new town under development, more people were buzzing around already, and many more would be arriving soon. The council wanted the front and some of the side sliced off the old school building to improve the thoroughfare. Imagine trying to squeeze past this jutting out bit of brickwork in the dark on your way home from the pub. Taking the structure back also enabled Hedley Haynes to create a front garden, in keeping with the green spaces and grass verges feel of Crawley New Town. Haynes cleverly reincorporated some original features. For example, the foundation stone used to be above the front entrance. Now it's embedded in the wall near our back gate. The finial along to the right got recycled when that part of the front roof was removed. It's now hanging above the front bedroom window. The classrooms at the front were sliced off, although the lower half of the front wall was retained, and is now our front garden wall. That old jutting out entrance was infilled with bricks. An infill could still be seen up until November 2021. Rumour has it that was a repair after a Canadian soldier's lorry hit the wall in 1943, but the post-war photo shows no scars, and the infill lined up exactly with the original entrance. All academic now, because another reckless driver managed to drive her car into our front wall, knocking that section out.
The wall was rebuilt in March 2022, reusing some of the original bricks, although most got destroyed in the accident. The hedge will take a few more years to sort itself out.
The cupola housing the old school bell used to be on the main roof, but is now on top of the garage. I found the bell in the garage, very rusty, buried under some junk. I cleaned it up and rehung it. The bell was originally cast by Thomas Mears Jr. at the Whitechapel Foundry in 1833. The Liberty Bell and Big Ben were also cast at Whitechapel, as many bells were in those days. Kai Lever catalogues the bells of Sussex. He says our bell would have been sand moulded. For any bell nerds out there, when rung, it produces a nominal frequency of 1587.5 Hz and a hum frequency of 716.5 Hz. Basically, it's in the key of G with a hum note of F, but it's not pitch perfect. Back to how the old building was reconfigured. The side wall, which shows up best in this 1930s photo, no longer really exists, but you can see the line of where it once was. It ran along from the back gate to join up at the front corner. Most of the brickwork is from the post-war alterations, but if you look closely, there are traces of historical sections for the old corridor. If you were stood looking through where this side window was, you'd now be leaning on our railings, looking into our front garden from Ifield Street. You can see how Hedley Haynes just sliced the front away. At the far end, it's more obvious how this part of the front garden was once part of a classroom. Surely every garden should have a fireplace. The brickwork needed some reinforcement work when we moved in. Another mystery is, it doesn't seem like there was ever a chimney here. Talking of fireplaces, our lounge has an angled one in the corner, though the wall behind it is flat. I suspect it was once open on the other side too, heating the room which was where our front garden is now. The old school was a single-storey building with a 14-foot-high internal ceiling. When converted into a dwelling, an internal staircase was added and 2 upstairs rooms created. You can see from this image how the windows of the old classrooms were once bigger, but altered for upstairs and downstairs purposes. I know it's hard to visualise, but if you look at this old picture and look at the chimney, you can still see that same chimney on our current roof. Some of the frontage was just taken off, rather than the whole building being demolished by a bomb and rebuilt. You really can trust me on this. Incidentally, there's another common legend which people often ask me about. According to the Ifield Village Conservation Association's Village Walk booklet, grooves in the sandstone on the gatepost are said to be where children sharpened their pencils. Who says? A former pupil told Jenny Frost that kids would scratch the wall while waiting to be let into school. Jenny's husband Harry wrote the Ifield Village Walk booklet and included the story. But is it true?
I've tried sharpening a pencil on this wall. Guess what? You wouldn't have been able to gouge these grooves with a pencil.
My dad was born in 1918 and used chalk at school, which would have been even softer. So is it just nonsense then? Well, way back in the 19th century, school children used quarry slate boards instead of paper and wrote with slate pencils. It was very common in Victorian times for slate pencils to be sharpened on a school wall. This section is very close to where part of the wall was reworked in the 1950s to put in the Villa Adelaide front gate, but if you look at the post-war pre-conversion picture, the cornice is part of the original wall. It could be an urban myth, but what Jenny Frost was told seems plausible. The skeleton of the old school is still evident from the current footprint of the house. This floor plan from 2012 shows the ground floor, the upstairs and the annex. According to the 1907 documentation, the classroom size was 24 foot long by 21 foot wide. If you look at this estate agent's brochure from 2012, that old classroom was divided in two to form the basis of the lounge plus the kitchen diner and study hallway. And what the estate agents optimistically referred to as a conservatory were part of an old corridor. The two doors into the lounge were probably the in and out doors to class. The garage was adapted from a boys' toilet and changing room, added as part of the second enlargement in 1908. It has a roof, but would originally have been open to the elements. This jutting out brickwork shows the original height of the walls. The two side slabs are what's left of the rudimentary urinal. I presume the slash zone would have wrapped around the far wall too, but that was removed to create the garage entrance. The toilet cubicles were crudely knocked away to open up space for a car. Their footprints are still very evident though. Just enough cubicle wall left for a log store. The teachers would have been able to look in over the top to check what boys were getting up to on the toilet. Charming. And this annex was the girls' toilet and changing rooms, again built in 1908. It was converted to a bedroom in 1971, when planning permission had to be obtained for the small end extension to incorporate a WC. I hope I'm convincing you everything wasn't destroyed by a bomb in World War II. The footprint of the property is still the same as in 1908, when the additional pieces of land shown in pink and blue on the deeds were incorporated into the enlargement of the original school building. Some confusion about the old school's history comes from mistaken identity. It changed names a few times, and other local schools sometimes had similar names. So let's talk about names and recap some numbers too. When the old school first opened in 1843, it was called Ifield Sunday School. Owned by the Church of England and run by St Margaret's, it was a one-room Sunday school which could accommodate 50 children and cost £114 to build. In 1871, Ifield Sunday School amalgamated with another local Sunday school to form Ifield National School, an elementary day school for boys and girls. The building was enlarged for that. On the first day of opening, January the 8th, 1872, the school log shows the master of the school, Alfred Horace Davy, admitted 57 children. Another 13 joined during the first 2 weeks. The annual report for 1902 said the number of children attending the school is 129. A photo from 1903 has a placard saying Ifield School, which it was known as locally, though that was never its official name. By 1907, the school needed to be enlarged again as education became compulsory for all, and upon reopening in 1908, the name changed to Ifield Church of England School. British History Online says attendance peaked in the early 1900s. From that high of 129 in 1902, in 1907 there were 108. By 1914, attendance had fallen to 60, by 1922 to 50, and by 1938 to 36. When the children were transferred to Little Deerswood in 1944, the old school was nowhere near as busy, although numbers were briefly swelled by wartime evacuees. So anyway, what's in a name? Ifield Sunday School became Ifield National School, which became Ifield Church of England School, locally referred to as Ifield School. What's confusing about this? Well, meanwhile, a couple of miles away, there was another school in Ifield Road. Although Ifield Road isn't in Ifield, it's in the West Green part of Crawley. So not to be confused with Ifield Street, which is in Ifield, and which our old school stands on the corner of. And what was that other school called? Well, it also had different names over the years. Crawley and Ifield National School, and later Crawley and Ifield Church of England School. There was another local school too, Sarah Robinson School in Robinson Road, called Crawley and Ifield British School. You wouldn't think people could get their wires crossed between Ifield Sunday School, which became Ifield National School, which became Ifield Church of England School, known as Ifield School, and sited on the corner of Ifield Street, and Crawley and Ifield National School, which became Crawley and Ifield Church of England School in Ifield Road, or with another different school called Crawley and Ifield British School, would you? As if. It's lucky no bombs went off near the other schools as well, isn't it? Oh, hang on. They did actually. If I show you the official logs for two schools side by side, you'll see what I mean about confusing parallels. This is an extract of the daily log for Crawley and Ifield Church of England School, which says, on Tuesday morning, 9th of February 1943, a single enemy raider dropped 2 bombs in the school playground, completely destroying the air raid shelter and lavatories and badly damaging the school building. Here's a photo. So yes, the school was badly damaged by a bomb which landed in the playground. But that's not our school, and it's not our bomb. That's the Crawley and Ifield Church of England School in Ifield Road, West Green. And this extract of the daily log for Ifield Church of England School says, at 6 p.m. on June the 30th, 1944, a flying bomb fell in the meadow by school cottages, and the force of the blast rendered the school unfit for occupation. No one was in the building at the time. That's our school, and that's our bomb, which fell in a field, not on the school. Crawley and Ifield Church of England School versus Ifield Church of England School. You can see how people got confused. Hopefully, I've convinced you the old school I live in today is still the old school of historical times, although it looks a bit different because some of it was removed or moved around, but that was nothing to do with a bomb. My wife and I are the 4th owners since the school's conversion to a dwelling. Hedley Haynes owned the site from 1951, but lived in nearby Langley Lane until moving in to become the first occupier in 1955. The census says his wife Irene joined him in 1957. I'm guessing their marriage prompted Haynes to sell on to Marjorie McKendrick. The 1957 conveyance document shows she bought Villa Adelaide, Ifield, for £3,625. In 1971, McKendrick, of whom I know nothing, sold it to J.E.S. Bidwell, another mystery man, the one who wanted a toilet added to the girls' changing room. In 1987, Peter Newsom bought it from Bidwell, and Pat Bodiam, Peter's partner, moved in with him from 1998. Then in 2012, they sold it to me and Sue, the current custodians. Just for completeness, the Victorian school cottage next door, where Don Grantham grew up, which you can see in the 1907 photo, was never linked with the old school. I hope that my pulling these threads together has clarified the history of the old school and dispelled some misconceptions. If you're ever in the neighbourhood, then hopefully you'll have a better understanding of what you're looking at when you walk by this place. If you want to see the original 1840s painting of Ifield by Miss Lewin, Percy Brown's school painting, and a display copy of Jeff Pitcher's Then and Now photo, they're on show at Crawley Museum, which together with Crawley Library has copies of all the books I've mentioned. Special thanks to Crawley Museum and Lambeth Palace Library for giving me access to their archives. And that's it. School's over. Thanks for watching. You can go home. Don't forget to do your homework.